The train's whistle screamed through the frozen January air of 1879 as Victoria Nielson pressed her gloved hand against the frost-covered window, watching the endless expanse of Nebraska Territory roll past in shades of white and gray. She had been running for 3 weeks now, fleeing the suffocating memories of Boston, where her husband and infant son lay buried beneath the autumn leaves, victims of scarlet fever that had swept through their neighborhood like a cruel wind. The doctors had told her there was nothing anyone could do, that sometimes God's will was incomprehensible. But Victoria had stopped believing in anything resembling divine mercy the moment she heard her baby's final breath rattle in his tiny chest. She was 24 years old and felt ancient, hollow, as though grief had carved out everything vital inside her and left only a shell of the woman she used to be. The only thing keeping her moving forward was a strange, persistent dream that had visited her every night since the funerals. A dream of mountains covered in snow so white and pure it hurt to look at, of cold, clean air that might somehow wash away the stain of death that seemed to cling to her skin no matter how many times she scrubbed herself raw in boarding-house bathtubs along her journey westward. The conductor called out their approach to North Platte, a supply town along the Union Pacific Line that had sprung up less than a decade earlier to serve the railroad workers and cattle operations that had begun to dominate this part of the territory. Victoria gathered her few belongings, 2 carpetbags that contained everything she had brought from her old life, though she had deliberately left behind anything that might remind her too strongly of what she had lost. No photographs, no baby clothes, no wedding portrait. Only practical items and enough money from the sale of their Boston townhouse to keep her moving for several months if she was careful. The platform was crowded with travelers and workers when she stepped down from the train car, her black mourning dress immediately marking her as someone carrying sorrow. The wind cut through her wool coat with surprising sharpness, and she pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders as she looked around the busy station, trying to orient herself. She had no particular plan beyond continuing west, toward the mountains she had seen in her dreams, but the ticket master had told her she would need to wait 3 days for the next connection to Wyoming Territory. "Madam, can I help you with those bags?" A male voice spoke from behind her, and Victoria turned to find a tall man in a porter's uniform standing respectfully a few feet away. He was perhaps 27 or 28, with dark hair that curled slightly beneath his cap and eyes the color of strong coffee. His face was weathered in the way of men who spent their lives working outdoors, but there was kindness in his expression that made Victoria's throat tighten unexpectedly. She had not encountered much genuine kindness since her losses. "I can manage," she said quietly, but her voice lacked conviction. The truth was she felt exhausted down to her bones, tired in a way that had nothing to do with physical exertion and everything to do with the weight of grief that made every simple task feel insurmountable. "I am sure you can, madam, but it is my job to assist passengers, and I would consider it a personal favor if you would let me carry those bags for you." He smiled, not the pitying smile she had grown to hate, but something warmer, something that suggested he understood what it meant to be polite without being intrusive. "My name is Porter Calloway, and I have been working this station for 5 years. If you need directions to a respectable boarding house or information about connecting trains, I can help with that as well." Victoria studied him for a moment, this Porter Calloway who introduced himself with such straightforward courtesy. There was something steady about him, something that reminded her of solid ground beneath uncertain feet. "Victoria Nielson," she said finally. "I suppose I could use directions to a clean place to stay. I need to wait for the westbound train." Porter reached for her bags, and she let him take them, falling into step beside him as he led her away from the bustling platform toward the main street of North Platte. "Heading to Wyoming?" he asked conversationally. "Most folks passing through here are either going to Cheyenne or doubling back to Omaha." "Further if I can," Victoria said. "I want to reach the mountains before winter ends." The statement came out sounding odd even to her own ears, and she saw Porter glance at her with curiosity. "Most people try to avoid mountain winters," he observed. "They can be harsh, especially for someone not accustomed to that kind of cold. If you do not mind my asking, what draws you to such a destination?" Victoria was quiet for a long moment, watching her breath form clouds in the frigid air. She had not spoken about her dreams to anyone, fearing they would think her mad with grief, which perhaps she was. But something about Porter's straightforward manner made her feel she could be honest. "I keep dreaming of snow," she said finally. "Pure white snow covering everything, making the whole world clean again. I know it sounds foolish." Porter shook his head. "It does not sound foolish at all. Sometimes we need to go to the places that call to us, even if we cannot fully explain why." He paused at the corner of a side street. "There are good mountains in Colorado Territory, closer than you might think. The railroad goes to Denver, and from there you can reach some of the highest peaks on the continent. More snow than you could imagine, and country so beautiful it makes your chest ache just looking at it." "You have been there?" Victoria asked, surprised by the passion in his voice. "Once, 3 years ago. I had some time saved up and took a trip to see what lay beyond this flat prairie we call home. Went up into the Rockies above Denver and spent 2 weeks in a mining camp. It changed something in me, being up that high, surrounded by all that stone and snow and sky. Made me understand why men seek out wild places when their souls need mending." He looked at her directly then, and Victoria saw recognition in his eyes, the understanding of one wounded person seeing another. "I am guessing you have something that needs mending too." The directness of the statement should have offended her, should have made her retreat behind the walls of propriety she had been raised to maintain. But instead Victoria felt something crack open inside her chest, a small fissure in the numbness that had encased her heart since the funerals. "I lost my husband and son to fever," she said, the words coming out raw and unpolished. 2 months ago. Everyone in Boston kept telling me time would heal the pain, that I needed to accept God's will, but I could not breathe in that city anymore. Every street corner held memories. I had to leave." Porter stopped walking and set down her bags, turning to face her fully. "I am deeply sorry for your losses, Mrs. Nielson. That is a weight no one should have to carry." He did not offer platitudes or religious comfort, for which she was grateful. "And you think the mountains might help?" "I do not know what I think anymore," Victoria admitted. "I only know I keep dreaming of snow, and it feels important somehow, as though if I can just reach those high, cold places, I might be able to find some kind of peace, or at least understanding." She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly aware of how strange she must sound, spilling her grief to a porter she had just met on a train platform in Nebraska. But Porter did not look at her as though she were strange. Instead, he picked up her bags again and continued walking. "The boarding house I am taking you to is run by Mrs. Sarah Henderson, a widow who keeps a clean establishment and asks no prying questions. You can stay there comfortably while you wait for your connection." He was quiet for a few steps, then added, "But if you are serious about wanting to reach the high mountains, about finding that snow you dream of, I might be able to help you more than you would expect." Victoria looked at him questioningly. "How do you mean?" "I was planning to give notice at the railroad next week anyway," Porter said. "I have been saving money for the past 3 years, planning to head west myself, try my hand at something other than carrying luggage and directing passengers. I know the country between here and Colorado fairly well, and I could guide you there safely if you were willing to trust a stranger with such a journey. We could travel by stage to Denver, then hire horses to go up into the high country. I promise you there is more snow in those mountains than exists anywhere else in the territories, and the kind of peace that comes from standing above the world with nothing but sky overhead. The offer was shocking in its boldness, and Victoria knew she should refuse immediately. Respectable widows did not travel across territories with men they had just met, regardless of how kind those men seemed. But respectability felt like a distant concern compared to the aching need inside her to reach those dream mountains, to find whatever it was her sleeping mind insisted she needed to discover. "Why would you offer such a thing to a complete stranger?" she asked carefully. Porter considered the question seriously. "Because I recognize the look in your eyes. I saw the same look in my own mirror for 2 years after I came back from the war. I was at Shiloh, saw things no man should see, lost friends who felt like brothers. For a long time after, I felt like I was walking through the world but not really living in it, just going through motions because I did not know what else to do. It was only when I went up into those mountains that I started to feel human again, started to remember what it meant to be part of something larger than suffering." He met her gaze steadily. "I am not offering anything improper, Mrs. Nielson. I am offering to help someone who needs help finding her way to a place of healing. If you want to make the journey, I can help you find that peace you are seeking." Victoria stood on the snowy street of North Platte, this rough frontier town so far from everything she had known, and made a decision that would have horrified her Boston relatives. "All right," she said. "I accept your help, Mr. Calloway. When can we leave?" A smile crossed Porter's face, genuine and warm. "Give me 1 week to settle my affairs here and we can depart on the Monday stage. That will give you time to rest and prepare for the journey. It will not be an easy trip, but I promise you it will be worth every difficult mile." They continued to the boarding house, where Mrs. Henderson proved to be exactly as advertised, a practical woman in her 50s who took one look at Victoria's morning dress and asked no questions beyond how long she intended to stay and whether she had dietary restrictions. The room was small but scrupulously clean, with a real feather mattress and a window that looked out over the rooftops toward the western horizon. After Porter left, promising to check on her the next day and help her purchase supplies for their journey, Victoria stood at that window for a long time, watching the sun set in shades of orange and pink that seemed impossibly vivid against the winter sky. For the first time since burying her family, she felt something other than numbing grief. There was nervousness, certainly, awareness that she was about to embark on a journey that defied all conventional wisdom, but beneath the nervousness was a tiny flame of something that might have been hope. She pressed her palm against the cold window glass and whispered to the darkening sky, "Please let this be the right choice." The week passed in a blur of activity. Porter came by each morning to discuss their travel plans, and Victoria found herself looking forward to these visits with an intensity that surprised her. He was easy to talk to, this former soldier turned railroad porter who spoke of mountains and healing as though they were intertwined concepts. He told her about his childhood on a Missouri farm, about joining the Union Army at 19 full of patriotic fervor that died quickly in the blood and chaos of battle, about drifting westward after the war because he could not bear to return to a home that felt too small for the man he had become. "I do not talk about the war much," he admitted on the 3rd day, as they walked together to the general store to purchase cold weather gear for Victoria. Most people do not want to hear the truth of it, and the ones who do ask usually want war stories, tales of glory and heroism. But there was not much glory in what I saw, just boys dying far from home, calling for their mothers with their last breaths. Victoria understood. People wanted me to talk about my grief as though it were a condition to be diagnosed and treated. They kept saying I needed to process my emotions, accept God's plan, find meaning in the suffering. But how do you find meaning in watching your baby die? How do you accept a plan that involves so much pain? She had not meant to speak so openly, but something about Porter's honesty invited her own. "You do not," Porter said simply. "Some things do not have meaning or purpose. They are just terrible things that happen, and all we can do is keep living despite them, find new reasons to draw breath each morning." He held the store door open for her. "That is what the mountains did for me. They did not give me answers or meaning, but they gave me a sense of perspective, reminded me that the world was bigger than my pain, that beauty still existed even when I felt broken." They spent the afternoon selecting warm clothing, sturdy boots, and other supplies Victoria would need for mountain travel. Porter was patient and knowledgeable, steering her away from impractical items vendors tried to sell her, and toward the gear that would actually prove useful in harsh conditions. When she worried about the cost, he waved off her concerns. "Consider it an investment in finding what you came west for. Besides, good equipment might save your life if the weather turns bad." By the end of the week, Victoria felt more prepared for the journey ahead than she had thought possible. More importantly, she felt less alone. Porter had somehow become an anchor point in her rudderless existence, someone whose steady presence made the enormity of what she was attempting feel manageable rather than overwhelming. She found herself noticing small things about him: the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, how his hands were scarred from years of hard work, but moved with surprising gentleness when handling delicate items, the timbre of his voice when he spoke of places he had seen and loved. On Sunday evening, the night before their departure, Porter came to the boarding house to finalize their plans. Mrs. Henderson, who had clearly taken a liking to both of them, provided tea and gave them privacy in the small parlor. "The stage leaves at 8 in the morning," Porter said, spreading a map across the table between them. "We will travel to Denver, which should take about 5 days depending on weather and road conditions. From there, we can hire horses and a guide if needed to take us up into the high country. I know a place about 30 miles west of Denver, a valley surrounded by peaks that holds snow year-round. If what you are seeking is out there, that is where we will find it." Victoria studied the map, tracing the route they would follow with one finger. The distance seemed vast, the terrain unknown and potentially dangerous, but the pull she felt toward those mountains had only grown stronger during her week in North Platte. "I am ready," she said, and was surprised to find she meant it. Porter looked at her across the table, his expression serious. "I need you to understand something before we leave, Mrs. Nielson. This journey may be difficult in ways you cannot anticipate. Mountain weather can turn deadly without warning, the travel will be exhausting, and there is always the possibility of encountering dangerous situations. I will do everything in my power to keep you safe, but I need to know you are certain about this choice." "I am certain," Victoria said without hesitation. "I know it sounds dramatic, but I feel like my life depends on reaching those mountains. Not my physical life perhaps, but whatever is left of my spirit, the part of me that did not die with my family. If I do not go, if I do not at least try to find what I am searching for, I think I will spend the rest of my existence simply going through motions, and that is not living. I would rather take risks than accept that hollow future." Something shifted in Porter's expression, a softening around his eyes that spoke of understanding and something else, something warmer that made Victoria's breath catch. "Then we leave in the morning," he said quietly. "And I promise you, Victoria, we will find that snow you are dreaming of." The use of her first name felt intimate in a way that should have alarmed her, but instead it felt right, as though they had moved beyond the formalities that governed interactions between strangers. "Thank you, Porter," she said, matching his informality. "I do not think I could do this without you." "You probably could," he replied with a slight smile, "but I am glad you do not have to." The stage to Denver departed on schedule the next morning, carrying Victoria, Porter, and 4 other passengers westward across the winter prairie. The journey was every bit as uncomfortable as Victoria had been warned. The roads rutted and frozen, the stage's interior cold despite the wool blankets provided. But she found herself oddly content despite the hardships. Porter sat beside her, pointing out landmarks and sharing stories about the country they passed through, and the miles slipped by in conversation that grew increasingly personal. On the second day, as they crossed into Colorado Territory, Porter told her about the girl he had courted before the war, how she had promised to wait for him but married someone else while he was gone. "I was angry for a long time," he admitted, "felt betrayed. But years later, I realized she had made the right choice. The boy who went to war was not the man who came back. She deserved someone who could give her a normal life, and I was too broken for that, at least back then." "Are you still broken?" Victoria asked softly. Porter considered the question. "Less so than I was. Time does help, even if not in the ways people claim. You do not forget or move on, but you learn to carry the weight differently, find ways to integrate your pain into who you are rather than letting it consume everything." He looked at her directly. "I suspect you will find the same is true for you, though I know it is hard to believe when grief is still so fresh." Victoria nodded, appreciating that he did not minimize her loss or rush her toward healing. "Did you ever consider courting anyone else?" "A few times, but it never felt right. I realized I was not looking for someone to help me forget the past, but someone who could accept that it was part of me. Someone who understood that healing does not mean returning to who you were before, but becoming something new." He paused, then added carefully, "Someone who had done their own work of becoming, who knew what it meant to be remade by hardship." The implication hung between them, unspoken but clear, and Victoria felt her heart beat faster. She knew she should redirect the conversation, maintain proper boundaries, but she found she did not want to. The truth was that she had come to care for Porter in ways that went beyond gratitude for his assistance. His presence had become important to her, not as a distraction from grief, but as something genuine and valuable in its own right. "I married very young," she found herself saying. "Thomas was a good man, kind and responsible, but I sometimes wonder if we ever truly knew each other deeply. We had a comfortable life, one that followed all the expected patterns, but I do not think either of us asked the big questions about who we really were or what we wanted from existence beyond following convention." She twisted her wedding ring, which she still wore. "I loved him, and I miss him terribly, but grief has made me realize how much of my life I spent meeting other people's expectations rather than understanding my own heart. That is one of the strange gifts that suffering can bring," Porter said. "It strips away all the pretense and forces you to confront what actually matters. Everything gets simplified down to essential truths." They talked late into the night while their fellow passengers slept, voices kept low in the swaying darkness of the stage interior. Victoria told him things she had never spoken aloud, fears and doubts and questions about faith and purpose that had plagued her since her losses. Porter listened without judgment, offering his own struggles in return, and gradually Victoria realized that something profound was developing between them, a connection built on shared understanding of pain and the courage required to keep seeking beauty despite it. By the time they reached Denver on the 5th day, Victoria felt as though she had known Porter far longer than a week. The city surprised her with its bustle and growth, already transforming from rough mining camp to ambitious young metropolis, despite being barely 20 years old. Porter secured them separate rooms at a respectable hotel and introduced her to an outfitter named Jim Reynolds, who could provide horses and supplies for their journey into the high country. "You are taking a risk going up this time of year," Reynolds warned as he assembled their equipment. "The snowpack is deep and storms can roll in fast. You will want to stay close to established trails and have backup plans if you get caught out." "We will be careful," Porter assured him. "I am not looking to get us killed. Just want to show the lady the high peaks while the snow is still pristine." Reynolds looked at Victoria with the assessing gaze of someone who had seen many greenhorns underestimate mountain conditions. "You have winter experience, madam." "None," Victoria admitted. "But I am stronger than I look, and I trust Mr. Calloway's judgment." "Fair enough. Just remember that mountains do not care about trust or good intentions. They will kill you dead as anything if you do not respect them." But he loaded them up with quality gear and drew Porter a detailed map to a high valley he described as one of the most beautiful spots in the territory. They departed Denver 2 days later, giving Victoria time to rest and adjust to the altitude, which Porter explained could cause sickness in people not accustomed to it. The trail led west and then north, climbing steadily through forests of pine and aspen that grew increasingly sparse as elevation increased. Porter set a careful pace, watching Victoria for signs of fatigue or altitude problems, but she proved resilient, drawing on reserves of determination that surprised them both. On the 3rd day out from Denver, they climbed above the tree line, entering a realm of rock and ice that took Victoria's breath away. The peaks rose around them in jagged splendor, their summits lost in clouds, and snow lay everywhere in deep blankets that sparkled under the thin mountain sunlight. The air was so cold it burned her lungs, and the silence was profound, broken only by the wind and the crunch of their horses' hooves through the snow. "This is it," Porter said softly, gesturing to the landscape spread before them. "This is what I wanted you to see." Victoria sat on her horse, overwhelmed by the stark beauty surrounding her. It was exactly what she had dreamed of, this world of white and gray and blue where everything felt clean and new. Tears streamed down her face, freezing on her cheeks, but they were not tears of grief. They were something else, some complicated mixture of release and recognition and awe. Porter dismounted and came to help her down, his hands steady on her waist. "Are you all right?" "I do not know," Victoria said honestly, "but I think I might be eventually." She turned in a slow circle, taking in the panorama of peaks and snow. "It is like the world has been washed clean up here, like nothing dark or painful can exist in all this purity." "That is an illusion, of course," Porter said gently. "Pain exists everywhere, even here. Animals die in the cold. Storms kill the unwary. The mountains themselves are born from violent forces. But there is something about being in the midst of such beauty that reminds you that suffering is not all there is. That majesty and wonder exist alongside grief, and both are real." They made camp in a sheltered spot beneath an overhanging rock face, and after tending to the horses and preparing a simple meal, they sat together, watching the sun set behind the western peaks. The sky turned colors Victoria had never imagined possible, deep purples and burning oranges and reds so vivid they seemed unreal. "Thank you for bringing me here," Victoria said quietly. "You were right. This was what I needed, though I could not have explained why." Porter was silent for a long moment before speaking. "Victoria, I need to tell you something. I did not offer to guide you west purely out of kindness for a stranger. From the moment I saw you on that train platform, I felt something I had not felt in years. A connection, a recognition, as though some part of me had been waiting for you without knowing it." He turned to look at her, his expression vulnerable in the fading light. "I know this is too soon, that you are still grieving your losses, and I have no right to speak of such things. But I cannot let this journey end without being honest about what I feel." Victoria's heart hammered against her ribs. She knew she should tell him it was indeed too soon, that she was not ready for such declarations, but the words that came out were different than expected. "I feel it too. This connection between us. It terrifies me because I never imagined I could feel anything like this again so quickly, and it seems almost disrespectful to Thomas's memory. But it is real, and it grows stronger every day we spend together." "Love does not diminish love," Porter said softly. "Caring for someone new does not erase or dishonor what you felt for those you lost. The heart has room for multiple truths at once." "Is that what this is?" Victoria asked. "Love." Porter reached for her hand and she let him take it. "I think it might be the beginning of it, yes. A different kind of love than what you had before, built on different foundations, but real nonetheless." He squeezed her fingers gently. "I am not asking you to decide anything right now. I just needed you to know what I feel so you can make choices going forward with all the information." Victoria looked down at their joined hands, at the way Porter's rough fingers intertwined with her own more delicate ones. Everything in her upbringing screamed that this was wrong, that she should be alone in her grief for at least a year, that developing feelings for another man barely 3 months after her husband's death marked her as faithless and improper. But sitting here in this high, clean place, surrounded by ancient mountains that had witnessed countless human dramas without judgment, those social conventions felt less important than the truth of what was growing between them. "I do not want to go back," she said finally. "Not to Boston, not to that old life. Even if I could, I do not think I fit there anymore. Grief has changed me into someone different, and I do not yet know who that person is supposed to be." "Then do not go back," Porter said simply. "Stay out here in the territories. Build a new life. Become whoever you are meant to be next. You do not have to do it alone unless you want to." The implication was clear, and Victoria found herself seriously considering possibilities that would have been unthinkable weeks ago. She could stay in Colorado, perhaps in Denver or one of the smaller mountain towns. She could use the money from selling her Boston property to establish herself independently. Or, and this thought made her pulse quicken, she could consider building that new life with Porter. "What would we do?" she asked, not quite ready to say yes but not refusing either. "If I stayed, if we decided to be together, what kind of life could we have?" Porter's face lit up with cautious hope. "I have been thinking about that. There are opportunities in the mountains for people willing to work hard. We could start a way station for travelers heading into the high country, provide lodging and guide services for people wanting to see the peaks, or work one of the stage stops along the Denver routes. I have saved enough to make a solid start, and combined with your resources we could build something good, something meaningful." "A way station," Victoria repeated, testing the idea. The concept appealed to her, the notion of creating a place of rest and safety for other travelers, other people seeking something in these wild spaces. "I think I would like that, to build something rather than just existing." They talked late into the night. making tentative plans while the temperature dropped, and the stars emerged in dazzling profusion overhead. Porter described properties he had heard about, opportunities in various mountain communities, and gradually a picture emerged of what their life together might look like. It would not be easy, they both acknowledged that. Mountain life was hard even for experienced residents, and they would face judgment from more conventional folks who would question the propriety of their relationship. But sitting there in the snow-covered heights, those obstacles seemed surmountable compared to the alternative of walking away from this unexpected connection. When they finally crawled into their separate bedrolls, Victoria lay awake staring up at the stars, her mind racing. She knew she should feel guilty, conflicted, torn between old loyalties and new possibilities. But what she actually felt was a tentative, fragile sense of rightness, as though some part of her that had been frozen solid since the deaths was beginning to thaw. She was not betraying Thomas or their son by wanting to live again, by opening herself to the possibility of new love. She was simply refusing to let grief be the final word on her existence. The next morning dawned clear and brutally cold, and they woke to find fresh snow had fallen during the night, covering their camp in pristine white. Victoria emerged from her bedroll feeling stiff and chilled, but also strangely renewed, as though the night in the high country had indeed washed something clean inside her. They spent the day exploring the area, with Porter helping Victoria climb to a high overlook that provided views across dozens of miles of mountain terrain. Standing there with the wind whipping around them, Victoria felt small in the best possible way, aware of her own insignificance against the vast scale of geological time represented by these ancient peaks. Her grief was real, and her losses were devastating, but they were also temporary in the grand scope of existence. The mountains would stand here long after she was gone, indifferent to human joy or suffering, and there was strange comfort in that perspective. "I think I am ready to go forward," she said to Porter as they stood together on the high point. "Not to forget or move on, those are not the right words, but to continue living in a real way, to open myself to new experiences and possibilities. To build something with you if the offer still stands." Porter turned to her, his face serious and tender at once. "The offer stands. It will always stand for as long as you want it." Victoria reached up and touched his face, her fingers gentle against his cold skin. "Then I accept. Let us go forward together and see what kind of life we can create." Porter pulled her close, and they stood wrapped in each other's arms on that high mountain overlook, two wounded people choosing to trust each other with their healing. When he finally kissed her, it was soft and careful, a question rather than a demand, and Victoria kissed him back with a mixture of tenderness and desperation, clinging to this man who had offered her a path forward when she had seen only darkness ahead. They returned to Denver a week later, both of them changed by their time in the high country. Victoria felt as though the journey had burned away some essential layer of pretense, leaving her more honest and raw than she had been before. She wrote letters to her Boston relatives explaining her decision to remain in Colorado Territory, knowing they would be scandalized, but no longer caring what they thought. Her old life felt like something that had happened to a different person, and while she would always carry the love she had for Thomas and their son, she understood now that she could carry it alongside new loves, new hopes, new reasons to wake each morning. Porter gave his notice to the railroad and began searching in earnest for properties that could serve their purposes. They maintained separate lodgings to preserve propriety, but spent their days together planning and preparing, growing closer with each passing week. Porter was patient about physical intimacy, never pushing beyond what Victoria felt ready for, but the desire between them grew steadily, constrained by convention but undeniable in its intensity. 6 weeks after returning from the mountains, they found the perfect property. It was a former trading post about 20 miles west of Denver, situated along one of the main routes into the high country. The original owner had died the previous year, and his widow was eager to sell and return east to family. The building was solid, constructed of thick logs with a stone fireplace and enough room to house a dozen guests if properly arranged. There was a barn for horses, a root cellar, and a spring that provided clean water year-round. Best of all, the view was spectacular, with mountain peaks visible in 3 directions. "This is it," Victoria said the moment she saw it. "This is where we are meant to be." They purchased the property using Victoria's money and Porter's savings combined, making them equal partners in the enterprise. The paperwork was complicated by the fact that they were not married, but Porter's lawyer friend helped structure the agreements to protect Victoria's interests. It was unconventional, but then, so was everything about their situation. 2 weeks later, on a bright April morning with wildflowers just beginning to bloom in the high meadows, Victoria and Porter were married in a simple ceremony in Denver. It was not the elaborate society wedding Victoria had experienced the first time, with its hundreds of guests and formal protocol. Instead, it was just the two of them, Jim Reynolds and his wife as witnesses, and a circuit preacher who asked no prying questions about how they had met or why they were marrying so quickly. Victoria wore a simple blue dress rather than mourning black, a deliberate choice that marked her decision to embrace life again rather than dwelling in perpetual sorrow. "I take you, Porter Calloway, as my husband and partner," Victoria said clearly when the preacher asked for her vows. "I promise to walk beside you honestly, to share both joys and sorrows, to build a life together that honors both our pasts and our hopes for the future." Porter's eyes were bright with emotion as he repeated his own vows. "I take you, Victoria Nielson, as my wife and partner. I promise to respect your grief even as I celebrate your joy, to provide shelter and safety, to love you with all that I am for all the days we are given." The kiss they shared after the preacher pronounced them married was deep and full of promise, and when they finally pulled apart, Victoria felt truly married in a way that went beyond legal bonds. This was a partnership of choice rather than social arrangement, built on mutual understanding and respect rather than convention. Their wedding night was tender and tentative, both of them navigating the vulnerability of physical intimacy with someone new. Porter was patient and attentive, making sure Victoria felt safe and cared for, and Victoria found herself responding with a passion she had not known she possessed. Being intimate with Porter felt nothing like her previous experience, which had been dutiful and perfunctory. This was something entirely different, a genuine connection of bodies and hearts that left her breathless and amazed. "I did not know it could be like this," she admitted afterward, lying wrapped in Porter's arms in their hotel room. "Neither did I," he confessed. "I have been with other women but never felt like this, never experienced this level of connection. It is because of everything else we share, all the layers of understanding beneath the physical." They spent one more week in Denver gathering additional supplies and hiring occasional help for the busiest seasons, then moved permanently to their property. Victoria threw herself into the work of transforming the old trading post into a proper way station and guest lodge. She sewed curtains, arranged furniture purchased from Denver merchants, and created systems for managing the practical aspects of hosting travelers. Porter focused on the outdoor work, improving the barn and outbuildings, clearing trails and establishing relationships with other mountain guides who might send business their way. It was exhausting work, but Victoria found it deeply satisfying. Every improvement they made felt like a statement of intention, a declaration that they were building something lasting and worthwhile. And every night when they fell into bed exhausted, she felt grateful for the unexpected turn her life had taken, for the train journey that had brought her to North Platte, and the porter who had offered to help her find peace. They opened for business in late May, just as the summer travel season was beginning. Their first guests were a family heading to the high country for a camping trip, and Victoria felt nervous and excited welcoming them. But the family was pleased with the accommodations and spread word when they returned to Denver, and within a month, they had a steady stream of visitors, enough to make the enterprise financially viable. As summer progressed, Victoria found herself settling into her new life with surprising ease. She loved the work of hosting travelers, hearing their stories and helping them prepare for mountain adventures. Many of their guests were people seeking something in the high country, just as she had been, and she found satisfaction in facilitating those quests. Porter proved to be an excellent partner in every sense, pulling his weight with the practical work, while also providing emotional support on the difficult days when grief would ambush Victoria unexpectedly. Because there were still difficult days. She would see a mother with an infant and feel the loss of her son like a fresh wound. Or she would come across something that reminded her of Thomas, and guilt would flood through her that she had moved on so quickly, had found happiness with another man. On those days, Porter would hold her and let her cry, never trying to fix the pain or hurry her through it, simply providing steady presence until the storm passed. "You loved them and you love me," he would remind her. "Both things are true and neither diminishes the other. Your heart is big enough for all of it." The first winter in the mountains was challenging, with deep snows and bitter cold that tested their preparations. They had fewer guests during those months, mostly serious mountaineers attempting winter climbs, but Victoria found she enjoyed the quieter season. She and Porter would spend evenings by the fire, reading aloud to each other from books ordered from Denver, or simply talking about their plans for improving the property when spring arrived. It was during that first winter that Victoria realized she was pregnant. The discovery was terrifying and wonderful at once, bringing back memories of her first pregnancy and fears that she might lose this child too. But Porter was overjoyed and supportive, helping her through the anxiety with practical measures and constant reassurance. "We cannot control what happens," he said gently when she confessed her fears. "All we can do is take sensible precautions and hope for the best. But whatever happens, we will face it together." Victoria drew strength from his steadiness, and as the pregnancy progressed without complications, she allowed herself to hope that this might actually work out. She continued working at the way station, adjusting her activities as her belly grew, and Porter took on more of the heavier tasks without making her feel diminished. Their son was born on a blazing August day in 1880, delivered by a midwife from the nearest town, with Porter holding Victoria's hand through the whole ordeal. When the baby emerged squalling and healthy, Victoria wept with relief and joy and residual grief for the son she had lost, all those emotions tangling together in the profound moment of new life. "What should we name him?" Porter asked, cradling the tiny infant with surprising confidence. Victoria had thought about this question for months. "James," she said finally. "James Thomas Calloway. James for your father who you lost young, and Thomas to honor my first husband." Porter's eyes filled with tears. "You would do that, honor Thomas that way." "He was a good man and deserves to be remembered," Victoria said. And I want our children to understand that love and loss are both part of our family story, that we carry our histories forward rather than pretending they did not happen. James proved to be a healthy, vigorous baby, and Victoria found that motherhood felt different this second time. She was more confident in her abilities, less anxious about every small concern, and she had Porter's full partnership in the work of raising their child. They adjusted their way station operations to accommodate the baby, and their guests seemed charmed rather than bothered by the infant presence. As James grew from baby to toddler, Victoria sometimes thought about her first son, the baby she had lost to fever, and wondered what he would have been like if he had lived. The grief was still there, would always be there, but it had changed quality over time, becoming something she carried alongside her happiness rather than something that prevented happiness. She had learned what Porter had told her that first day in North Platte, that healing did not mean forgetting or moving on, but finding ways to integrate loss into the ongoing story of life. The way station prospered over the following years. They built additional cabins to house more guests, hired seasonal help during the busy summers, and established a reputation as one of the finest mountain lodges in Colorado Territory. Porter developed expertise as a guide, leading groups into the high country, while Victoria managed the business side of operations and created a welcoming atmosphere that kept guests returning year after year. They had 2 more children, a daughter named Sarah in 1882 and another son they called Matthew in 1884. Victoria was grateful for each healthy birth, never taking for granted the gift of children who thrived. She made sure they grew up knowing they had a brother who came before, that loss and grief were part of their family fabric, and she watched Porter be the kind of father she wished Thomas could have been given the chance to be, fully present and emotionally available. By 1888, nearly a decade after Victoria had arrived in North Platte fleeing grief and seeking snow, she sometimes had to stop and marvel at how completely her life had transformed. The way station was thriving, her children were healthy and happy, and her marriage to Porter had deepened into something profoundly sustaining. She was not the same woman who had pressed her hand against that train window looking for escape. She had been broken down and remade by experience, shaped by loss and love alike into someone stronger and more authentic. One evening in late September, with the aspen trees turning gold and the first snow dusting the high peaks, Victoria stood on the porch of their lodge watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of orange and purple. Porter came up beside her, sliding an arm around her waist, and they stood together in comfortable silence watching the day end. "You ever regret it?" he asked finally. "The choice you made to stay to build this life with me?" Victoria turned to look at him, this man who had offered to help her find peace when she was drowning in grief, who had loved her through the difficult work of healing, who had partnered with her to create something beautiful and lasting. "Never," she said firmly. "This life we have built, our children, this place, it is all more than I ever imagined possible when I was trapped in that grief. You gave me a reason to keep living when I could not find one on my own." "You would have found your way eventually," Porter said. "You are stronger than you knew back then." "Maybe," Victoria conceded, "but I am grateful I did not have to find it alone, that you were there on that platform, that you offered your help, that you saw something in me worth caring about when I could not see it myself." Porter pulled her closer. "I saw someone beautiful and wounded and brave enough to keep seeking something better despite the pain. How could I not fall in love with that?" Their children's voices drifted out from inside the lodge, James now 8 years old and helping his younger siblings with some game, and Victoria felt a wave of gratitude so intense it almost hurt. She had been given a second chance at life, at love, at family, and she had seized it with both hands, despite all the reasons she could have refused. The grief for her first family would never entirely disappear, but it existed now as one thread in a much larger tapestry of experience, giving depth and texture to her happiness rather than destroying it. Over the following years, Victoria and Porter watched Colorado Territory become the state of Colorado in 1876, witnessed the continued expansion and development of Denver from rough mining town to proper city, and saw their way station become a landmark for mountain travelers. They aged together, silver threading through their hair, lines deepening on their faces, but their connection remained strong, built on foundations of shared experience and mutual respect. James grew into a capable young man who loved the mountains as much as his father, and he began taking over more of the guide work as Porter's knees started protesting the steep climbs. Sarah proved to have a gift for hospitality and a head for business, gradually assuming management of the lodge operations. Matthew was the scholar of the family, always reading, always asking questions about everything from geology to philosophy. And Victoria and Porter scraped together money to send him to the university in Boulder. In 1895, on their 17th wedding anniversary, Victoria and Porter took a trip back into the high country, just the two of them, following the same route they had taken that first winter when Victoria had been seeking the snow of her dreams. They were both older now, the climb harder than it had been, but when they finally reached the high overlook where Porter had first kissed her, where she had first opened herself to the possibility of new love, Victoria felt the same sense of awe and gratitude she had experienced years before. "Thank you," she said to Porter as they stood together looking across the vast expanse of peaks. "For everything. For seeing me when I was lost, for offering help when you had no obligation to, for building this beautiful life with me." Porter took her hand, his grip still strong despite his 73 years. "Thank you for trusting me with your healing, for taking a chance on a stranger, for being brave enough to love again when it would have been easier to stay closed off." He kissed her softly. "You made my life mean something, Victoria. You gave me purpose beyond just surviving my own pain." They stayed up there for hours, talking about their children and grandchildren. For James had married and given them 2 grandsons already, reminiscing about the years they had shared, and making plans for whatever time they had left together. When they finally made their way back down to their camp, Victoria felt complete in a way she had never imagined possible during those dark months after her first family's deaths. The years continued to pass, bringing their share of joys and sorrows. Porter's health began to fail slowly, his heart weakening, and by 1900 he could no longer make the high climbs he loved. But he faced aging with the same steady grace he had brought to everything else, taking satisfaction in watching their children thrive and their grandchildren grow. Victoria cared for him tenderly as his strength waned, and he would joke that she was finally repaying him for helping her find her way all those years ago. "You paid that debt long ago," she would assure him. "Every happy day, every moment of love, you paid it over and over." Porter died peacefully in his sleep in the spring of 1902, with Victoria holding his hand and their children gathered around. He was 79 years old and had lived a full life, but Victoria grieved his passing with an intensity that surprised her. She had loved him deeply, perhaps more deeply than she had loved anyone, because their love had been built on such honest foundations, 2 broken people choosing to heal together. But this time, grief did not break her. She had learned over their years together how to carry loss without being consumed by it, how to honor the dead while continuing to live fully. She kept running the way station with Sarah's help, took joy in her grandchildren, and maintained the mountain trails Porter had loved so well. And sometimes, on clear winter days when the snow lay pristine on the high peaks, she would stand on the porch and remember the dream that had brought her west, the Porter who had offered to help her find peace, and the beautiful life they had built together in the mountains. Victoria lived another 12 years, remaining active and engaged until nearly the end. She died in 1914 at age 78, surrounded by children and grandchildren in the lodge she and Porter had built together. Her last words were spoken while looking out the window at the snow-covered peaks. "Thank you for the mountains. Thank you for showing me how to live again." The way station remained in the family for generations, each new owner maintaining the welcoming atmosphere Victoria had created and the respect for the mountains Porter had instilled. And sometimes, guests would comment on a particular quality the place had, a sense of peace and healing that seemed to seep from the very walls, and the family members would smile and tell the story of the woman who came west seeking snow and the cowboy Porter who helped her find not just peace, but love and purpose, and a reason to embrace life despite grief. It was a story worth telling, a story of hope and healing and the courage required to open your heart again after loss, and it lived on long after both Victoria and Porter had become part of the mountains they loved so well.